Hi and welcome to Return to the Hearth, and this is my first full build video for part of my trench board for Trench Crusade, Kill Team and other sci-fi games that we might be playing. So we started off this build with some blue foam. It's quite low density. If you can't get hold of this, just get hold of any kind of foam, any sort of styrene foam is fine. But the blue foam, the pink foam, is a bit denser, so it's much easier to cut into, and you don't get that weird bobbling that you get with polystyrene quite often. So I'm just cutting out a really basic shape for my hill. I wanted this to be a objective or some sort of point of interest on my trench board, on my 40k kill team board. And so I'm just cutting out the very rough shapes for a raised area on this modular piece of terrain. You can kind of build these however you want, as long as they've got a rough shape, and sticking it all together with judicious applications of white glue and cardboard are the kind of materials you might just find lying around. And I find this is really important when making boards, to maybe make it in a way that is easy for everyone to get hold of, and easy materials that we can all use and have lying around. So once you've marked out roughly what you want to do, you start moving on to cutting the board out. I used a bit of filler there just to cover the big gaps between the board sections, and then I started cutting out the rough slope shape with my craft knife. Be careful to not cut yourself while doing this, and also be really careful not to snap your knife blade whilst you're trying to cut the edge off like I did. It does happen, especially when you are cutting at an angle and not properly looking after your tools. So I then moved on to a much more durable tool, which was much better for the job and actually allowed me to do a lot more in the way of making the smaller parts of the terrain a bit more interesting, cutting out some rocks and cutting out the areas of terrain that I felt would be interesting to look at, so we can add some rocks and some dints and some more interesting bits, not just a bare slope. So when you've cut out all of your slope and your sides, I've stuck some bark and some wood on there just because when it's all sprayed and put together it'll make a lovely stone effect. Now we're going to start making the portal, the demon portal, the gate to the stars, the stargate. So I'm using again this blue foam just because I had loads left over from my trench board and it's a good material to use. So we're cutting it again with a new Stanley blade. And it is really important to try and cut this from top down. I would use I've got a hot wire cutter that I've used in a lot of my trench board, but I wanted to do this just with a Stanley knife and tools that everyone's going to have in their hobby, in their workshop. So when you're cutting these pieces out, just dry fitting them, just having a look how they fit, and not being too precise. I want this to be an old, ruined sort of ancient structure that the forces of hell are vomiting its minions through. So I'm not being too precise and too exact on the stairs or on the places where the joins go, or the decoration. I wanted it to look overall quite rough, quite old, quite war-torn, especially if we're looking in the 41st millennium or the Trench Crusade grimdark universe. So we're just cutting in all of the stairs, we're dry fitting the portal, just seeing where everything's going to go, and making very, very rough measurements over where you're going to put your decorations, your stairs, your cobbles, whatever you want to do. I decided to do an off-centre kind of large stone work top with some stairs going up. But you could do whatever you really wanted to, as long as you're happy with your overall design. And just making sure that the actual portal is able to sit squarely, sit flush to the foam that you're using to base it on, and marking out areas where you're going to cut in some detailing to the stone. Most of these foams you can use a bit of stone and roll some texture onto it, but this foam is very, very soft, it's quite low density, so it's not great for holding in detail, but it is very good for making just your basic shapes, making the different things that you want to look at on your model. Now you could just use a knife to cut out all the stone details, it's very easy to do, but if you've got like a hot tool. I think this is a wood cutting tool or wood scoring tool, but you can use like a welding iron or any kind of hot tool you've got. It just makes it much easier to carve detail in because it seals the holes behind it in a more sort of handy way to keep them a bit more structurally stable. Do wear a mask if you're going to use this, because you are burning plastic and you do not want to be inhaling loads of burnt plastics. And now we're moving on to gluing the portal, the circle, onto the main structure of the base, the sort of base stone layer. I'm just using some cocktail sticks, just make sure you sharpen and clean the edges off, push them into the foam. This just helps it when it's drying. You could just glue it on with some white glue. Don't use hot glue on this stuff because it will melt. But if you're just using some white glue, it's very easy. Give it a good spread around, make sure you've got a nice even spread, and you're going to have way too much if you do it like I did. As you can see, I'm not the most careful crafter. Slap it on the stairs and other places where you can apply it to other bits of your structure. And give it a good shove down. I used a bit of a hard plastic so I didn't shove the toothpick in my hand. And then you want to be putting these onto your stairs. Now, as some of you have noticed, I've got a curve on these stairs, and that's not how that goes. So quickly pull it out, put it on the other side, and hopefully that'll be the last error on these stairs I make. So here we've got the rough shape of what we're going to be using. Again, use some cocktail sticks just to secure this to the main base, the hill slope that we've created. And once you've got it stuck on there, you can start playing around with a Stanley knife just to cut in some bigger details, take some chunks out of that stonework, make it look a bit older, a bit more ragged and worn in this war-torn universe we're going to be in. Now I use straight acrylic paint onto this. As I said, it's quite a soft foam and it doesn't take textures very well. Some of the pink foams are great, but this one's not so good. So a really thick layer of black acrylic was what I used to seal it in and give it a bit more depth and structure. And then I started building. I wanted like two braziers at the front, two big light sources at the front, sort of flaming pits. So I didn't want to use just a tea light stuck on there because it would look a bit rubbish. So I built up these little tiny wall sections. I've made a lot of Mordheim boards, and I find that using individual bricks just looks better. You get a really nice effect. It takes a long time, you've got to cut the bricks and glue the bricks, but it does look really good. So I can recommend, if you are doing anything, just to make sure you use individual bricks. They look great. And again, just give them a nice big coat of black acrylic. I decided to stick these guys down onto the board, and then I was making my texture paint. So it is an equal mix of just solid bits. I think there's cork in there, some sand, some acrylic paint, some glue, and then a little bit of water, and I do mean a little bit of water, just to help it sort of mix up and go on your board. And then give it a really good mix, make sure it's all mixed in together, and it should be that kind of that consistency. You can buy texture paint, but it's so easy to make yourself that you just have to add a bit of PVA glue paint and some sort of texture, sand, cork, whatever you've got lying around, chuck it in a bucket, give it a good mix, and you've got your own homemade texture paint. It does take probably about 6 to 8 hours to dry, maybe more depending on your room, so give it a good bit of time to dry. So once it's dry, you can start painting. I stupidly deleted the video of me dry brushing all of the stonework, so you only got the video of me doing the top highlight dry brushing. And when you're dry brushing, really make sure you haven't got very much paint on your brush. You really need to have a very small amount of paint. If you have too much on the paint, you will get these big streak marks and it just won't pick out the details so well. So make sure you are being really light with your brush work and really light with your amount of paint you've got in your palette when you're working on it. And then I just went and decided I wanted some chaos runes, some hell marks, some sort of decoration on the disc. It's looking very Stargate now. If I can make a circular moving one, that would be amazing. Maybe I'll look at doing that in future. And then to match the rest of my board, I've got some lime green. I've watched too many 90s cartoons growing up, and I'm obviously obsessed with chemical waste spilling all over everything. So I've put some of the nice lime green colour I used on my barrels, and then a little bit of, I think it's AK water effect, a very tiny amount, just to give it a nice finishing texture. And then we moved on to our braziers, our little flaming pits, and it's the same as I made the explosions in my main trench board. It is just an electrical tea light. You put some glue on it, and you get a bit of cotton wool that you've pulled apart, and you liberally put it on, you pull it to roughly the shape you want to get it, you give it a little spray of black spray paint, and then lag it in spray glue to make that cotton wool go hard and solid. And then once that's done, you're pretty much there. It's easy smoke effects, and when you turn the lights on, they'll look really good. And then we're just moving on to the very sort of last dry brush. See there, I've got too much paint on my brush and it leaves a big horrible streak. So really make sure you've not got very much paint on your brush. And then you're just same as my trench board. If you've watched the 90-second videos on those, it's just a very light dry brush over all the texture paint we've made. It brings out all those details. I also went over all of the bits I stuck in, the horses, the skulls, the other bits of detail, just to give them a bit of a base coat before I painted them up with the bone colour. And you're just going over all of your entire board. Give it a good dry brush, make all the details pop a little bit, and it gets all the loose bits off as well. And then just going over the skulls, going over the bodies, the dead horse that's died in the service of whichever faction's trying to take this place, and giving it a nice easy coat. I'm not making it incredibly detailed, it is quite rough and ready, just because it's a battlefield. I'm thinking a lot of these bones and these soldiers have been here for a long time. And then when you finish with it all, you can liberally apply a bunch of PVA glue. I'm just going to stick down some colours, some flock. We've got some little tufts we're going to put down just to break up the brown. You can fix a lot of the mistakes in your board. If you see any lines or you've over dry brushed and you've got some smears with the dry brush, you can always put it on there to fix some of the mistakes, or just wherever it looks good and interesting. Just liberally applying some flock to our temple, to our bases, and to make sure it all looks a bit more different, more varied. Adding a bit of brown and green in the same place, because you very rarely get one texture and one colour of grass and tuft in one place. So just trying to make it look as natural as possible. And this looks pretty cool. It's got a very nice structure to it. It's quite open, but again, I've watched too much cartoons as a kid, and there's got to be something in that hole. So we're starting to work on what we can put in that hole. And I use a UV resin. I use my 3D printer. Not everyone's got access to that, but maybe you can buy something like an epoxy resin, or you can even use PVA glue, or anything you've got lying around. Try and make yourself like a portal or some sort of watery effect. You could use water effects, but that might be quite expensive because it needs to be quite thick. So what I started doing here was I started making a little dam, a little circle, just to try and contain some of that resin I'm going to pour in. And then we go in with a bit of cling film just to really make sure that resin stays in the reservoir and the dam we've made. And that circle I've just drawn around inside of the gate just to make sure that it's the right size. And I've got some of these guys on my pile of 3D printing misfits, or things that I've printed thinking I'd paint them or make them and never actually did. So I've just put them in this little portal as servants of hell being forced out. I think we've got a couple of minotaurs there and some sort of chaos worshipping big hat guy. And as you can see, I'm being quite liberal with the UV resin, just pouring it over them so it looks like they're actually coming through this portal. I'm not too worried about getting air bubbles in it because it's all going to look quite swirly and water-like anyway. And there we have the finished article, the troops coming out from inside the portal, my green marines defending the Violet Shrines, and the evolving conflict going on around this terrain piece. I really like this sort of terrain style. I really like this kind of piece, this fact you can just put it down anywhere and it fits with multiple games. It's not as grim dark as sort of like the Trench Crusade or 40k perhaps, but I find if it's something like this, it's a bit more useful, a bit more multi-purpose for different games I might play. So there you have it. There's how I build a lot of my terrain, in this case how I've built my temple, my chaos portal, my gate of the stars. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you have, please consider liking, subscribing to my channel, and I'll see you in the next one.